Nora. Let me get my presentation up here. Can you hear me and see my screen? Doing good that way. Okay, it's a good start. I wanted to welcome everyone tonight again, and thank you for coming in on such a nice evening. As I mentioned earlier, I thought you all might be out cleaning your bird boxes or hanging some new ones because it's time to do that. So let this be a reminder, and thank you for joining us again on such a nice evening. And thank you, Lori and Nora and Tin Mountain for hosting us tonight. I appreciate that. I wanted to talk to you tonight. Let me introduce myself. Yeah, I am Debra Marnich. I'm a soil conservationist with the USDA NRCS, and that's the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We are a department under the Department of Agriculture that works with private landowners and federal cost share programs, and we address resource concerns and do conservation planning on private lands. So it's a service that's available to anyone on private lands, and our office is right here in the middle of Conway. And tonight I wanted to talk to you all about birds and nesting, natural nest, human influence or created nest, habitat and survival, and coexistence all together. There are a lot of topics and I have a lot to cover. So without further ado, just one more ado, I wanted to tell you that I have a passion for wildlife photography and birds, and probably 90% of the photos here are mine. I'm so happy to share them with you all, and I'm really lucky to have the opportunity to do this on my own and also at work. So I hope you enjoy them. And with that, we'll move on. As I mentioned, I wanted to cover some very broad topics just before we jump into nesting. And I first wanted to cover the 5 essential elements for all wildlife habitat. The first one is food, obviously. The second one is water. And the third one is shelter. The fourth one is space to live in or occupy. And the fifth one, which is the most important of all, is arrangement of all of these essential elements. One should be next to the other or within distance of the other so that your habitat is the very highest quality it can be. It's a very general concept, but it's just so important to think of when you're creating habitat in your yard, or you're augmenting it, or you're subtracting or adding to it. All of these things are very important. Another broad topic I wanted to speak of before we get started is human interface or involvement and the effects we have on wildlife habitat. Historically, we've had natural disasters and things that would happen like wildfires and maybe say a beaver plugging up a stream and causing a huge wetland, which would turn into a meadow. All these natural processes, dead trees that happen and exist on their own, and old growth forest, big old trees that sometimes humans have had involvement, and they interface with these natural habitats and processes, and it can be very detrimental. However, we've also, I think humans have done multiple things to help and augment wildlife habitat and nesting habitat, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. But I just wanted to make you aware of the influence, obviously, that we have with natural processes and the influence we can have in promoting wildlife habitat as well. We'll jump right into this and start talking about birds and nesting. I want to start with adaptations and birds that nest on or in human structures and their strategies. Pretty soon, you'll be seeing eastern phoebes. They're in the southern part of the state right now, moving their way up. And probably almost everyone here has had a nest under a roof or under a deck or somewhere that they could watch. And this is actually a really, really neat process. This was my nest. under the shed. But the Phoebes, the shed roof actually, and the Phoebes return every year. Their strategy is nesting on human structures because, you know, human structures are very protected. They're much more protected than something out in the middle of the woods. So they seek companionship of humans for protection and actually end up being very successful. Another species that nests on structures in or on human structures is obviously the barn swallow. And you know, the barn is a place where animals are kept historically. The doors are closed at night. It's a safe place. It's warm, it's dry, and probably their success rate of nesting is very, very high in a barn. So that's their strategy. And I wanted to touch briefly on chimney swifts. They are colony nesters and seek out large chimneys on old factories and mills and such like this. However, naturally, they used to nest in large pine trees that were maybe the top had blown off and they all could funnel in like they are right here in this picture. And I think today in our age, chimneys are replacing the big trees as habitat. However, one more thing that is happening is these large chimneys that were put in, you know, quite some time ago are in need of repair or in need of taking down because they're in need of repair. So the big trees have disappeared and now the chimneys are disappearing. So it's just an interesting cycle. I wanted to touch on water or ground nesting birds and their strategy and how they survive and reproduce. This is a Canada goose, and you can see snow on the ground. They are early season nesters. That's their niche. All the birds arrive almost at the same time or in stages. The earliest ones can claim the best habitat. So this is a strategy, and it's a good one. Quite a few different species do this. And also, the Canada goose has adapted to humans as well. They coexist with us right in our backyards. So they are afforded some human protection and sometimes overlap our space. And a lot of times you'll see that they nest on islands where they're protected from terrestrial predators. However, they have multiple predators, and in which case they lay many eggs in a clutch so that at least some of them will survive. That's another strategy. And as you can see in this picture, I think they had 4 nestlings that survived this year. This is a family I watched on the pond behind work, and I think they ended up with 4 out of a clutch of probably like 12. So another bird I wanted to touch on is common loon. Everyone's favorite on lakes and ponds in and around New Hampshire and also Maine. And they have very specific requirements for nesting. They nest on islands or platforms close to the water's edge. They are very large prehistoric birds and have heavy bodies. They're big boned. They need a lot of space to take off and get into flight. And their back legs are very short and they're actually very, very cumbersome on land. So that makes them very susceptible to predation. So when nesting, this is a huge consideration. They like to nest on the side of the water level, right beside the water level, so that they can escape quickly if necessary. And because of that, they require a water level that does not change drastically, or that would put them in a lot of danger if they had to run over land to get to the water and all of a sudden the water level decreased. And loons will also return to the same nest every year. It's one of their strategies. This is really, honestly, the first time I've ever seen a loon build a nest, like be in the process of building a nest. So it was really exciting. It was very interesting to me. This female was pulling up all kinds of muck and vegetation off the bottom of the lake and tucking it in around her furiously. And in a few moments, I discovered why, because she had, in the time that she was building this nest, laid an egg, and there it was golden egg. It was really beautiful. And she just had barely finished the nest. So she was running late with time. Anyhow, I wanted to touch briefly, and I'm sure a lot of you will notice the location here. of this loon's nest. And I wanted to bring into focus all the human interface that's going on here with this habitat. The loon nest is right here, and as you can see, we've got boats, and this is a small marina. We've got homes, we've got recreational kayakers, and we've got a beach and a boat ramp to the left of this, and also a dam, which is actually keeping the water level stable. So it is a good habitat. However, there's a lot of traffic here. There is a loon nesting sign here, and the buoys are roped around the island as well. So in this case, there's a lot of human interface going on that's probably not really helping this loon out. But you know what? We've really tried. We're considering this. We're trying to preserve the nest and the habitat, even in such a small area, a small, busy area. So just something to consider. And as you all know, the Loon Preservation Committee down in Moultonborough have been conserving loons and habitat, nesting habitat for years. And they utilize loon rafts, which are made out of a wooden crate structure with rocks and vegetation on top. And they float, they're anchored to the bottom of the lake, but they float. So no matter whether the water level changes or not, the loons will have a safe place to nest. Another bird that specializes in different strategies for nesting is the American bittern. It nests in the riparian zone, and the riparian zone, for those who don't know, is the area alongside a river. It's a vegetated area alongside a river or lake, and they specifically nest there because they are camouflaged to look like reeds or grasses standing up when they stand up, the markings on their body. So their body's camouflaged, but also their eggs are camouflaged as well to match the nesting material they're going to be using. And all of this is done by design and survival strategy. Another example of camouflage of bird and eggs is the ruffed grouse. As you can see, this hen is blending in almost completely with the blacks and browns and light browns of leaves and twigs and sticks on the forest floor. There's a shot of her eggs in the nest, and they are also a buff color, matching most of these birch leaves, and they are pretty well hidden, and that is their strategy. Again, for such a small bird, she's got a pretty big clutch size. Ruffed grouse are very susceptible to weather, especially inclement spring weather with heavy rains and cold temperatures. So their strategy, like the Canada goose, is to lay a large clutch size to ensure survival. And we can touch briefly on birds that build nests in trees, which we're all very familiar with, maybe most familiar with. A lot of times when you're trying to figure out which bird is where and who they are, sometimes you only have a nest left over. And when you're trying to determine that, size and nesting materials really matter, okay? So I've got two nests here, and the first nest is made of pine needles, fir, and leaves, which tells me, and it's very small in size, which tells me it was in a forest, a mixed wooded forest, and it was probably a warbler of some sort of species, based on how the nest was made and what the materials were. And the next nest was mostly made of field grasses and weeds. It was a larger size. It was located on the very side of a field. And I'm guessing it was probably an indigo bunting because that's their habitat. But I guess the message here is when birds are nesting, they're choosing materials that are in their habitat. So, because nesting takes a lot of energy, nest building takes a lot of energy. So they're going to go to the closest thing and utilize it and save energy. Okay, and this is a great horned owl nest that I actually found, and it was on the side of Route 16 down near Rochester. A coworker of mine told me, she said, "Debbie, I drove up here this morning and I saw a bird on a nest and it was like this." And I said, oh my God, I said, I have to go see it immediately. I knew exactly what it was. And sure enough, I drove down there, and it was a great horned owl with 2 owlets. And she had occupied this nest. As you can see, it's almost falling apart. Great horned owls, their strategy is to nest very, very early in the season. They're early nesters. That's their niche. That's where they arrive. And they also may not build a nest to save time and energy. And in this case, they nested in this dilapidated hawk's nest, and it was really, really just ready to fall out of the tree. Those were the owlets having a peek at me when their mom took off. And I was very careful to use my truck as a blind on these shots, because she had her eye on me, and really something I didn't want to get near, definitely telephoto lens shot. I just wanted to make note of the buds on this tree. It's a very early spring, and so the leaves have not even come out yet. So this is the time frame, they mate in February, late February, mid to late February. So they're nesting by March. And that is their strategy for reproduction. This is an osprey in a natural nesting situation. We really don't see a lot of these anymore. They require, this was in the Adirondacks of New York, a huge white pine that was dead on the side of the road. And this bird was in it, and I got to watch it for a while, but the nest was enormous. And I'm sure they were very successful in this nest. And this is a platform nest, or a human-created nest, because there is a lack of trees, obviously large trees for these birds to nest in. But these platform nests have worked out wonderfully. Normally they're 30 feet in height or taller than the tallest treetop, and they're taller than the tallest treetop so that ospreys can keep an eye on what's going on around them, and hopefully not have an aerial attack from above. So they have to be pretty high in height, and they have to have a pretty clear view of everything for quite some way. Ospreys are fish eaters, as you see here. This one, the male was bringing food back to the female. And remember, we go back to the habitat arrangement and the 5 essential elements. Arrangement is so very important for these ospreys. The platform has to be 1,600 feet from water. And they are top of the food chain predators. So they were affected by DDT back in the 70s. However, I think because of our human efforts to bring them back, ban DDT, create habitat for them, they've been very successful, and they've made a great recovery. This was a bald eagle's nest I saw in Minnesota on a wildlife refuge. And bald eagles also are a top food chain predator, and also suffered from DDT, and also, however, have come back. Their nests are absolutely enormous. They can be 4 to 5 feet in diameter. They can weigh up to a ton or more, depending how old they are. And each year, 1 to 2 feet of new material is added. And I kind of delineated it here on the levels. I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but it seemed to me like maybe it was a 5-year-old nest or so. Everyone probably here has seen a great blue heron rookery at some point in their life, or a wetland that contains many great blue heron nests, and they call them rookeries, or they're usually found in wooded wetland, beaver bogs, where the trees have been flooded and they're dead and they're standing. And their strategy for nesting is they come early to mid-spring, and they usually nest in populations and densities because there's safety in numbers. See, this guy is up here. Then if somebody comes from up top to attack a nest, this guy is alerted. He's the alarm system. There's a bird right there. He's laying down, but as you can see, his little beak sticking out. And so if somebody comes up the tree, then this guy is the alarm system for this guy. So it's just a safety and number strategy. And that's how they strategize the nesting situation. I watched this great blue heron who maybe got here late in the season or didn't have quite as great of a nesting site, he or she chose to be in the top of this tree, and there was no nest underneath of them. This was kind of a dangerous situation because as I was watching and taking a picture, a bald eagle flew over and put the bird up like minutes later. So he was very open from above, really not the best nesting strategy. Other colonial cavity nesters are bank swallows. They require open face slopes along rivers. And their strategy is obviously the hole fits their size, and really on a steep cliff face like this along a river, nothing else is really going to access this hole or these colony nests because they're going to have to fly in. And so that rules out quite a few predators. So, and again, safety in numbers. They're in a colony. And kingfishers will also nest in situations like this as well. Just a closer shot of the burrow or the nest hole. I wanted to touch on purple martins, and it's an interesting situation with purple martins in New Hampshire. We have a handful of nesting colonies left. Pardon me. There are a few spots actually in Carroll County, which is wonderful. They have suffered huge habitat destruction, and that's why there's really only a handful of nesting colonies here, and in different states as well too. The population has suffered greatly, and they're completely dependent on human-made nesting structures currently. Their natural habitat was old-growth trees, and they were nesters in big trees like the chimney swift, colony nesters, and they would get into big structures and nest like that. But loss of habitat has really affected them. And that's a purple martin house that has active purple martins in them. This is one, it's down in Cape May, New Jersey, where they have a huge nesting colony. And this is called a gourd rack nest structure. And they're very successful in those structures. So I want to touch a little bit on our programs with NRCS and the type of boxes we can fund. And we have Matt Coughlin with us tonight here. He is the Carroll County Conservation District Manager, and he actually has boxes for sale through the Conservation District, and he is going to follow up and let you know all about those boxes. And some of them look like this, so he can tell you all about them after the presentation. So this is a Songbird cavity nest box. We offer funding for boxes like this and duck boxes and kestrel boxes and such through our EQIP program through NRCS. That's the Environmental Qualities Incentive Program. It addresses resource concerns with private landowners such as erosion, water quality, habitat, etc. And when you're hanging these boxes, we'll touch on aspect for a second, is very important. You want them always facing east or southeast. And the reason for that is morning sun is the best thing to have on a box, because after maybe a cooler evening where the nest box cools down, it's nice to have the morning sun first thing to warm the box, and you go through the day and it gets hotter and hotter. You really don't want a western sun on this box later in the afternoon, or it's going to fry everything in it. So aspect is very, very important. Bluebirds, tree swallows, chickadees, house wrens, Carolina wren, prothonotary warbler, and flying squirrels will nest in these boxes. To keep the flying squirrels out, I have a strategy, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. But ideally, you want to hang these 5 to 6 feet in height, facing east to southeast, on a pole or a post, or a clear tree trunk. Say like this tree in the back. There's no limbs. You don't want anything in front of the box or around it so predators can access it. And generally, if you have a field or an open area, these nest poles are really the best. They're conduit poles. You can get them at Lowe's. They're really the most success. We've had the most success with those, or actually poles like this in the background, the metal green poles as well. This is an eastern bluebird on a box, and that's what it's designed for, like I mentioned. Also designed for a tree swallow. These are all boxes we put up through our program working with landowners. This was up in Chatham. And as I mentioned, you can hang them on a clear-faced tree, or even a utility pole is a really good place to hang them. It's a little guy poking out. And if you open the box, this is what you would be to find their nest. This is a tree swallow nest. And again, it's nesting in a field, so it's using the materials right there accessible in the field, which are straw and grasses. And you'll always know it's a tree swallow because they line their nest with feathers. And there's a little nestling right inside. Actually, a bunch of them, one there, one there. And this is a look at a black-capped chickadee's nest. And again, more of a woodland species, not an open area species like the tree swallows and the bluebirds. So it tends to almost always use moss to start to build its nest. And then lines the inside of the nest with hair of an animal, hair from cattails, cattail fuzz, and warm items like that. And there's a black-capped chickadee nest. And there are the nestlings. And if you ever open a box and see it's stuffed and jam-packed with sticks and twigs like this, it's almost always a house wren. They're pesky little buggers. They like to get in there and throw. One time I pulled up to my house and I had a box like this that a chickadee was nesting in or started to build a nest in. And all I saw was moss flying out the front hole. And I thought, what is going on? And sure enough, it was a house wren, and he was throwing the whole nest out that the chickadee had made. And he went ahead and jam-packed all these sticks and twigs in here. And that's his survival strategy. We were talking about kestrels earlier. This was a bird that I saw down in Ossipee on a farm that we work on. And it was actually a pasture field, and he was perching on this bluebird box. And I mentioned, I'll go back to this later, I'm just going to jump around a little bit. I mentioned predator protection for flying squirrels. These little metal rings, you can actually use washers, are really nice to affix to the front of your box so that the squirrels can't chew through the hole and make it bigger. Anyhow, back to our friend, the American kestrel. This is a box he would use. It's much larger, and also saw-whet owls and screech owls would use something like this as well. You want to locate it on a pole 30-foot high, and again, south or southeast. And the real important thing is to locate on or near fields. Arrangement. And number 5 is a key essential element. Arrangement here. This is where I saw the kestrel, and this is a pasture, and there's a pasture in front of the ladder as well. And I really believe strongly that hanging bird boxes, if you have a farm and you grow crops or you have animals, is integral part of integrated pest management. Kestrels eat a ton of insects. In fact, their favorite meal is grasshoppers, and they also eat rodents as well. So you could do a lot of pest management with a few kestrel boxes up in your yard or on your farm. The strategy of this box and placement was the box was placed near this barn, and I saw a kestrel in a field behind this house, and I said, why don't we throw a few boxes, in this contract here? And this box had 4 to 5 successful clutches hatched. And again, I think it was human protection, that made this box so successful and had the bird coming back every year. They were safe by the barn. So, and sometimes that's a strategy. This is a duck box that we put up with Shakura Lake Conservancy in an EQIP contract they had on a wetland that was adjacent to the lake. There are 4 species of coyote nesting ducks. There's actually 5, a golden-eye, hooded merganser, wood duck, and a bufflehead. And they all require cavities to nest in. There's a wood duck and the hooded merganser. And again, they're coming early. This is ice behind them. That's their strategy. There's the ducks that arrive at the very earliest. And if you're going to hang a duck box, you want to hang it south or southeast on or near water, 10 to 20 feet above the ground. And it's recommended to put wood shavings, pine shavings preferably, in the box and clean it in early spring. We'll talk about a bat box. Sunny locations are always the best. Face south or east. And again, arrangement is going to be a really big thing here. You'll hang the box 10 to 20 feet. And New England brown bat and big and little brown bats will occupy them. Oops, I'm going to go back for a second. Locating near water is a really important thing because bats are insectivores. So essentially a field with a pond in it or field, an open space with water in it is really a nice arrangement for a bat box to be hung near. I just wanted to touch briefly on bee nesting because we're talking about nesting. 70% of bees nest in the ground. I know that surprises a lot of people, but 30% of bees nest above ground. And generally they like to nest in woody structures like this, holes in wood or pithy stems of, like, say, blackberries or something like this that they can get into. This is a homemade type of bee nesting situation that one of my landowners made with wood pellets and leftover stuff. Essentially, bees will nest in any junk pile you have, wood junk piles sitting around the house. They love it. We can touch on Bardow nesting boxes now. Mature hardwood forest or the edge of the forest is a great place for them, or a field. 15 to 40 feet in height. And again, these guys will require water within 200 feet as well. It's a much larger box. And I helped a landowner on his property down in Tamworth with one. And oh, this guy showed up in my front yard one winter hunting my bird feeder. And yeah, so we wanted to transition into, I told you I'd speak of predators and pests on nests and how to protect them. In a songbird nesting situation, a lot of times the biggest problem is that parasites will get on the babies. They're called blowflies. And this is a piece of hardware cloth that is just kind of folded over on the edges. It's a little platform for the birds to build their nest on, so that it keeps it up and elevated off the bottom floor of the box, and it keeps it dry. Drier situations are better for nests, so they don't, if they're sitting moist, they're more susceptible to parasites and different molds and such. Also, this is a predator protection baffle that these folks put on so that something can't climb up a pole. If you use a conduit pole like the one I showed you earlier, you won't need this, really. And this is a box I checked on a property up in Jackson, and I opened it and thankfully did not get too close to it. But, you know, hornets and different bees love these structures. Different insects will want to move in immediately. So this is a situation that happened here. Needless to say, I closed the box and walked away because that's all I could really do. And this is another situation that I had to figure out what I was looking at first. However, hornets had moved in and they were manipulating the box from the outside as well as the inside, almost turning it into like a big hornet's hive that you'd see in a tree or something. So a lot of different insects like to live in these boxes. And a lot of different creatures like to get in them and raid them. Yeah, this is a fisher that got into a duck box, and I don't know if anyone was home in there or he found anything, but it certainly does happen. Predation is a really big thing. So it's really something to consider when you're hanging a box. You don't want to leave a bird in a bad situation. You want to make them as successful as possible. And also black bears love to get into some of these songbird boxes. That's actually my dog. It's not a bear. But look at this heavy gauge pipe and how it was bent right over. So a lot of times we'll have nails that are in the front of these or screws that come out. So it's a lot harder to get the box open. There's not much you can really do about that. I had a landowner who had apple trees. They had electric fencing and they put their bird boxes in the electric fencing. And that was kind of a nice protection from bears situation. Speaking of bears, this is, yes, a real photograph. It's not mine, so I can't tell you the end of the story, but a friend lent it to me. This is up at Pondicherry Wildlife Refuge, and this is a situation where there is a single nest in a tree, not safety in numbers, and it looks like a young bear that's trying to climb up there. And, maybe if there was a nest there, we could have had an alarm call, or, maybe it would have been less susceptible for a bear to fight off 2 or 3 or 4 adults. However, there was not one, and I'm not sure it was a very good ending to the story, but I just really wanted to stress how heavy predation is on nests. I mean, a lot of times nests can be, sitting ducks for predators. So with all that, I wanted to reiterate some important parts of the presentation, and the take-home message today is create successful habitat for birds. Mimic Mother Nature and how things are arranged already with the 5 essential elements for wildlife habitat: food, water, shelter, space, and arrangement of them all, which is the most important. And remember that when you create or enhance bird nesting habitat, no matter how small, like in a small pollinator garden, this is behind our office at work, or how large, this is a nice beaver flowage in a huge wetland complex, you create habitat on all levels for all species, and everything is always interconnected. So there's lots of considerations. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight.
All right. Thank you so much, Deb. I have, there are a few questions that came in through the chat that I wanted to ask of you. And then I didn't know if Matt was going to wanted to talk more about the nest boxes available. So the first question is, do you need permission to hang a nest box on a utility pole?
That's really interesting. That's a great question. And you know what? I'd love to know the answer too. I don't know, but I would assume you could call, you could call the energy company, whoever it may be, write the telephone number down, the pole number that's on the pole, and ask them. But I don't really know. That's a good question that I'd have to find out, the answer to. I really don't know that one. I know that some energy companies on some power lines, to enhance wildlife habitat, they'll hang their own boxes. But yeah, I really don't know the answer to that one. It's a good question.
All right, so Tom, you'll have to explore more. The other question is just asking for a little bit more information about screening against parasites, as well as baffling, and where people might purchase those sort of items.
Right. So the screening is just regular, they call it hardware cloth, and it's a metal screening that usually comes in a big sheet. And what you would do was cut a piece out that would fit the bottom of the box, that you could fold the edges of it, a square, fold the edges so that it's the nest is sitting up on it. And you could buy that at Lowe's very easily. Also, the baffling, you could make yourself with some tin, or that would look like a PVC, some type of PVC piping that was attached to that pole. And I would really suggest conduit pole from Lowe's or Home Depot, something, or your Ace Hardware, wherever you would purchase it, because it's naturally smooth and critters can't climb up and down it. as well. And sometimes people will use like a tin baffle on the bottom of things, and you could just get a sheet of metal and do that. But the hardware cloth inside is really important. Birds have tons of parasites. They almost always have mites in different areas. They can have chiggers and ticks. And these blowflies in certain areas are very horrendous, and they can kill the nestlings, and a lot of times do. So I think it's really important to kind of set yourself up for success with that hardware cloth and the separation in there. And I also did a little research on, wasp nests, and paper wasps love to get in these boxes too. And there was a woman in New York who had put ivory soap, rubbed it on the top roof on the inside to keep the wasps and the hornets from nesting in the box as well. So that's a strategy.
All right, great. If any other folks have questions for Deb about logistics or any of any of the boxes, she mentioned you're welcome. Just unmute yourself manually and ask her directly. You're just too informative, Deb.
No, I have a question, Deb, and I know I asked this before, but this whole concept, I think it's particularly with wood ducks, this whole concept of putting up more boxes for dumping. Can you explain what that is?
I can't. I sent you that article.
I know, but I still don't understand. It just seems very odd.
Well, there's a concept too of tree swallows and bluebirds, and it's just nesting participation. And I think with the dump nest, the bird shows up and it wants to claim all the best nesting spots, and it puts its eggs in multiple boxes so others can't use it and they're not successful. So, but I don't know exactly how it works with the duck boxes. I used to maintain a lot of boxes in Maine on different flowages when I worked with Parks and Lands, and we would find nests like you're talking about all the time with a whole clutch of eggs that was just kind of left.
Deserted. Yeah.
I think it's kind of like the occupying habitat principle, like sometimes that house wren will jam pack a box full of sticks and never use it and move to the next box and do the same thing. So, but I really should have done my homework for you, Lori.
Well, or I should just figure it out myself. I know, but it's an interesting, because it kind of seems like a waste of,
energy, a ton of energy. Yeah. Exactly. I agree. So I don't know. And people think the solution is to hang more boxes. So, yeah, I just don't know. I don't know about the concept.
Deb, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I feel like this comes up, we get asked, and I know it comes up with both. And I've heard it discussed more with bat boxes than with bird nesting boxes, but the effect, either positive or negative of, sort of painting and designing them. Because for a while there was a trend of, get them and kids would paint them multicolors or, putting designs on them. And if, that either, adds or detracts from the use of nest boxes?
Right. That's a great question. I think that when you're applying a layer of paint, depending on what the color is, if it's really dark, like a black color, or it's really light, like a white color, now you're doing things with temperature. So, and boxes should be vented. They should have drainage holes in them too. So I would really never suggest to paint any of them, honestly, because you just don't know what the natural temperature has to be. What I would really suggest is I have a bunch of cedar bird boxes. They're made from cedar. And that's like a natural insect repellent as well, and a waterproof and really, water resistant type of wood. I would suggest that. A lot of these boxes are made out of pine and they're really good too. However, I never recommend painting or doing anything to alter the outside, or the temperature is really important, you know, and that's why the eastern sun is the most important thing in the morning to warm that box up, and the western sun is not a great thing in the afternoon when the temperature's risen. So I don't know, I wouldn't mess with that too much. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions before Debra hands it over to Matt?
I have a question.
Yes.
Hey, Deborah. My question, I raise Angora rabbits and I put their Angora fur in my suet cages.
Yes.
Is that safe for the environment and good for the birds? They seem to really like it.
Yeah. Hi, Will. I'm glad you could join us
Hi.
tonight. It's great to see you.
And you too.
Yeah. You know, there's controversy. There's a ton of controversy around hair, and there's a ton of controversy around dog hair and putting it out, and like any kind of domestic animal that you would put maybe an insecticide on. That's really not recommended, because if you are treating your dog with some type of flea or tick repellent or something like this externally, and you know the bird comes and stuffs a box with it, it's probably not the greatest thing. However, it may keep the parasites away. That's an idea I just thought about. But anyhow, the Angora rabbits, if you're not treating them with anything, I don't see why not. I mean, I imagine they do love it, you know. I mean, it's a great liner, and normally they would, you know, maybe find some fur off a carcass, or, you know, deer fur I've seen, and soft, maybe like rabbit fur, that type of thing. And you know, the inside of a cattail fur has been used quite frequently. But yeah, I mean, the Angora rabbit fur must be like, yeah, the primo liner, nest liner.
Yeah, it makes these really beautiful little nests, little sections in the nest.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Thank you, Will.
All right, Dick, did you have a question? Debra?
Question, I think, Deborah.
Hi, Dick.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Curious, what is it that you specifically recommend to put at the entry hole to prevent squirrels from chewing them open?
Yes, that's a great question, because they're hard to find. However, I went to my landowner's house, and he had his brother had crafted those little metal rings. But I said, now, wait a second. I said, I searched them online, and you can search squirrel excluders on nest boxes, and they come up. You can actually purchase them. They're expensive. So what I did is I went to the hardware store and I looked in the plumbing section for the ones that are on mine. And I bought washers, huge plumbing washers that fit around the outside hole, excuse me, and protected them, and, you know, protected the wood around the outside hole. And then I put screws, you know, here's the round, and I put screws on 1, 2, 3 sides of them, and it holds them in. Yeah. Yeah.
You're looking for a particular diameter of the hole?
I was just trying to preserve the hole that was there, which is a Songbird hole. I haven't memorized, you know, the opening to it, but I just wanted to preserve it, or, you know, keep it just how it was, so the squirrels couldn't chew through it and enlarge it. Because the gray squirrels and the red squirrels will get into those and just wreak havoc on them. Flying squirrels too, and you really don't want to promote flying squirrels around the house a whole lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good to see you.
All right, and so there are 2 more questions that have come in. One is a comment, and I'm wondering if this might be James Longo, but it says some ducks are known as brood parasites and will lay eggs in others' nests in the hopes the others will raise their young, and so that might help explain
the nest dumping.
Yeah, the nest dumping. And it says wood ducks will do this. And then there was a question about, and you know, Deb, you were saying this sort of before we got started, but maybe reiterating about, should last year's nest box be cleaned out?
Yeah.
And if so, what is considered cleaning out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is a lot of controversy over this. However, I think when you're intervening and creating an unnatural situation to help things out, I think that there's certain things that can help them out. As far as nesting goes, like I mentioned, there's tons of parasites on birds. And you know, a lot of times in a natural setting, a bird will come in and just build another nest on top of a nest that's there. And so it goes on and on and on. However, you're still having that whole layer of junk underneath where there may be parasites waiting to, you know, explode and, you know, whatever, invade a nest, the next nest. So I think that my thoughts are that emptying the nest is really kind of a great way to go. I've had success with it. The chickadees will come in and just rebuild, and the bluebirds do, and it takes some energy. However, I think that the parasitism on nest is really huge. And, you know, I've never studied it in a natural setting, but maybe it's larger than we even know. So I hope that answers the question. I would, oh, and the way I would clean them is, I understand the question. The hardware cloth, I just pick the whole nest up off it and dump it out and brush all the debris out and then just put the hardware cloth back in. You know, and a dry situation for nesting is really essential, and that's where the hardware cloth comes in.
All right, great. And there's these questions. The questions just keep coming, Deb.
Good, good, I love it.
Or just clarifying with the east southeast orientation, is that, you know, is that ideal for all nest boxes, or are there specific types that might be oriented differently?
As a general rule, most birds would prefer that, just because the morning sun. And depending on the times of years they're nesting, you know, you're going into the summer and you don't want the western sun. Everything that I've seen, to the best of my knowledge, you know, it's a great orientation. You know, if you situate a box into the northwest aspect and you're getting storms coming in and stuff like this and weather, it's taking the brunt of it. So that's another thing I don't think that birds would really favor. And possibly different species may have different requirements. However, I think with the songbirds and most of the other birds I've seen, I think owl boxes are a little more flexible, but he's laughing. But I think in general for the songbird boxes, yes.
All right, great. Thank you, Deb.
You bet.
I think that might be the end of our questions for now.
Okay, great. Well, again, I thank you so much. And I'm going to hand the stage over to Matt Coughlin, who again is the Carroll County Conservation District Manager. And he's got some really exciting news for you about the boxes they're selling this year. So thanks for joining us, Matt. And thank you all for joining us tonight as well. Thanks, Nora.
All right, thank you, Deb.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the introduction. Oop. All right.
I know, I just learned how to
I don't like that.
Why did you? I know.
Okay, all right. So I wasn't expecting that. That was a great program, Deb. That was lots of excellent information. So the Conservation District is a close partner with NRCS, and we're actually co-located in the same office in Conway. And we provide the nest boxes for the NRCS contracts, but I decided to expand the program and offer them for sale to the public. So you can find them on our website at carrollccd.org. That's Carroll with 2 R's and 2 L's, as in the county. ccd.org. And you can click on the programs tab and go to the nest box page. And we have 4 different types. We have the bluebird / tree swallow, we have American kestrel, barred owl, and wood duck boxes, which we learned tonight may be useful for other species as well. But right here I have one of our bluebird boxes, and they are made out of locally sawn pine. One of our supervisors has a sawmill at his property in Tuftonboro, and he's donated the wood that he milled himself, and we have a small group of volunteers that build all these by hand for us. They've gone and put an extra layer on the front, so the squirrels, even if they try to chew, have about 2 inches of material to get through. So even if they widen the opening, they still won't be able to get in there. Nice ventilation on the bottom, and we've wood burned our logo into the side, and it's got a screw that you can pop open the side with. I'll take my earphones out for just a second and show you the wood duck box because it's quite large. So here's this. All right, and pricing is $20 for the bluebird houses, $60 for the kestrel, and $80 for the other two because they're so huge. And then we only offer them for pickup at the Conway office, but we also have them on display at Branch Hill Farm down in Milton Mills, and they've hung them on their property as a display on their nature trail, and you can buy them in their gift shop there as well. So that is all I had.
They look great. They look well built there. I'm liking those bluebird boxes. So.
All right. Yes. Thank you for that. And if anyone missed that, missed how to get there, you can reach out to us and we can help you connect with Matt and help you find those resources. But thank you, Deb. Thank you, Matt. And thank all of you for coming inside and joining us on this lovely spring evening. I hope that you enjoyed the program, and I hope that you join us for some of our upcoming spring programs.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you.